Hello there, and welcome to Nothing Ventured, Nothing Gamed. I'm your Rules Arbiter Steve, here to bring you a new video in our new class dive series, where this time we're looking at the fighter, the master of arms, the arbiter of warfare, or a grizzled soldier heading out on their own for adventure.
Let me tell you of the days of high adventure.
So stay tuned as we take a deep dive into what a fighter is, what abilities they get, how they differed from the original 2nd edition, and is the fighter the right class for you? And welcome back. So what is a fighter? So many of you who've played these games before or watched a lot of our videos probably already know what a fighter is in the fantasy game or RPG context, so you can skip past this. I'm going to leave those little link thingies down below so you can skip past in the timestamps below so you can get to the meat of the video. But for those of you who have only a generalized idea of what fighters are, or don't have any idea of what a fighter is in the context of these games, we're going to talk about it. So first and foremost, fighters in fantasy context are just basically specialized martial characters. They are the guys who fight. But that is a big umbrella that we're going to talk about. Like, while barbarians use more instinctual fighting and rage and their emotions, champions or paladins use their faith to bolster their powers, and other martials, like rangers and rogues, train in other areas besides fighting. Fighters spend all their time mastering their martial craft, i.e. fighting. But it's not just fighting. Fighters tend to be known as masters of weapons, often mastering multiple different weapon styles. Sometimes the traditional sword and board, meaning a one-handed weapon and a shield used to protect themselves or their allies, or ranged combat, typically thought of weapons for a ranger. But fighters can be as deadly, if not more deadly, with crossbows or bows, or even thrown weapons, where they can take a big honking two-handed weapon and just beat their enemies and crush their enemies. Crush their enemies.
To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women. That is good.
Sometimes fighters even carry entire arsenals of weapons, having the right tool for the right job. And similar to how wizards train their mind to master magic, fighters use their mind to master all aspects of combat, from weapons and armor to specific weapon training. For these characters, the weapon choice can really drive the direction for a particular fighter, from a ranged fighter being cautious and wary to a giant two-handed wielding fighter eager to get into the mix of the melee. In Pathfinder Core, fighters only get a few abilities at first level, and they don't really get a path, quote-unquote path, to choose from like the other classes we've already talked about. So we're also going to talk about some of the starting proficiencies that the fighters get, because some of these stand out even amongst other martial characters. So the first things we're going to talk about is the fact that the fighters start out with expert in all simple and all martial weapons and trained in advanced weapons. One of the few classes that actually start with any training in advanced weapons. Just it shows that they have a very adept in their knowledge of weapon usage, ahead of most other characters that they only start with trained with their particular weapons. Next, unlike Dungeons & Dragons, where everyone, and even in 1st edition Pathfinder, everyone had this thing called Attack of Opportunity. They renamed it Reactive Strike, but we're just going to use Attack of Opportunity. Everyone kind of knows what we're talking about. The idea is that if someone does something in front of you in the reach of the fighter, they can, they mess them with an item, trying to drink a potion, or they try to cast a spell, or try to move away from the fighter or all the other characters. The character can use Attack of Opportunity as a reaction to swipe at the enemy, go whap. In Pathfinder 2nd edition, that has been largely removed from most people, including monsters, including players. Fighters are the only ones that start with it at first level. Other martials can choose to pick up this feat later on, but fighters are the only ones that grant it at first level, at least so far. The other ability that they get at first level is Shield Block. We've already talked about Shield Block, but effectively it lets you, when your shield is raised, you can take a reaction to when you're hit to block up some damage. Your shield will take a little damage, you might take a little damage. Now that really sums up the abilities of the fighter at first level, at least. Although they seem quite simple, the feats are where the class really comes alive and you really start seeing the different weapon and combat styles that the fighter is going to get access to. And the fact that they have D10 hit points so they can take a beating. So now we're going to talk about the differences and the changes that happen between original Pathfinder 2nd Edition and the new Pathfinder Core. I will warn you, this section is going to be a little short because there wasn't that many changes, even less than the other classes. And they were all to the feats, either new feats or slight changes to old feats, with the exception of some small verbiage changes, like Attack of Opportunity is changed to Reactive Strike, but nothing else really changed. So, and honestly, I think this is a testament of how balanced the fighter was compared to the other classes. Firstly, we're going to go over some changes that were to existing feats that came from Pathfinder 2nd Edition Original to the new Pathfinder Core. And I'm going to start with an errata. I normally don't talk about erratas because you can always just look them up online, but this one threw me for a loop because I was so confused on how this ability technically didn't function. And it's called, I'm just going to point it out because it was pretty obvious. It is the aggressive block feat. It says it's a reaction in the book, at least in the first printing of the book. It isn't a reaction, it's a free action. This is a typo, so you can still use it because otherwise this feat technically can't function at 2nd level. So effectively it works on when you shield block, your shield block gets a little better and it gets a little bit of a boost. Like I said, it's a free action. It was a free action in the original Pathfinder. When they changed it over, the symbol got changed by accident. It's an errata. It works properly. The first actual change, though, is to the powerful shove feat at 4th level. It used to only deal damage when you shove a creature using the shove action. But now when you have a critical with your shield, polearm, or club, and you have the critical specialization, this also inherits the benefit. So it lets you do damage with more weapons more often in the time because it does function on crits with certain weapons. It's a small buff, but a welcome buff. Now the next is the sudden leap feat at 8th level. For 2 actions, this feat allows you to jump or leap at your enemies and to make an attack along the way. Formerly, if you had another feat called Felling Strike, you can make this a 2-action ability into a 3-action activity and gain the benefits of that feat as well. Now, if you have that feat, you can do that. It doesn't cost you an extra action. It's still only 2 actions, and you get the benefit of the Felling Strike of a feat. You still need Felling Strike to get this to work. But as I said in previous videos, any bonus to action economy is good for me. I like action economy, so. Now we're jumping up to 10th level with a Disarming Twist feat. It got a slight boost as well. Now, when you're using this feat basically lets you make a strike. And if you're successful, you hit because you made a strike, as well as you gain the benefits of the success and the critical success of the disarm action. Yet again, a little bit more action economy. This no longer you don't have to make a second action with the disarm. It's all incorporated into 1 strike. Now, if you're in the disarming stance, an earlier fighter feat, you get a +1 bonus to this feat's strike. Normally, the disarming stance only gives you the benefit when you disarm specifically. Now, when you make this strike, it adds that +1 benefit. The level 14 feat, Desperate Finisher reaction, it just cleaned up some language. It made it clear that the multiple attack penalty, or the MAP, as it's been coined, applies to this reaction. Most of the time, MAP, or multiple attack penalty, doesn't apply reactions because generally reactions happen not your turn. This reaction actually has MAP that this reaction actually occurs on your turn. They just clarified that MAP actually applies. That's the only thing that really verbagey that they changed. And one more feat, and it's finally the multi-shot stance. This is a level 16 feat. It's quite high level, and it has had its prerequisites changed. It used to require the triple shot feat to qualify. Now it only requires the double shot feat, but it still gains all the same benefits. The original feat said if you're making a double shot, the penalty is reduced by a little bit, and if you're using the benefits of triple shot, there's more penalties and it's reduced by a little bit more. It really only means that you don't actually need the triple shot feat, but generally if you're going down this road, you're probably going to get it anyway. But it's nice that the requirements were lessened a little bit in this case, just in case you wanted to dabble into multiple different weapons. You don't necessarily need the triple shot feat anymore. So there are the changes that happened between original Pathfinder 2nd Edition and the new Pathfinder Core. Mostly small quality of life changes, slight buffs, or clarifications of rules. And the fighter has the least amount of new feats that I've seen in the class that we've already looked at. There are only 3 new feats at 2nd level and 1 new feat at 16th. All the other feats that were in the player core book are from the old core rulebook or the advanced player's guide. And as we've done before, I'm only going to go over 2 feats, one lower level one of the 2nd level ones, and a higher level one, just to give you a taste of what the fighter can do now in Pathfinder Core. One of the lower level feats that I really like thematically was called Blade Break. It's a 2nd level feat, and it is a reaction triggered when someone forcibly moves your character. Either pushed, shoved, repositioned, spell happens and it pushes you. All you need is to have the melee weapon in your hand and a hard surface in reach. And effectively, you jam the weapon to that hard surface and reduce the amount of movement that you're moved by. So if you're moved 20 feet or more, that the ability would normally move you, you only move 5 feet, effectively 1 square. If you're moved less than 20 feet, you don't move at all. You jam that weapon in and you stand strong. This is especially useful if you're especially playing a fighter with very heavy armor, which might reduce your movement, and you've spent some time getting into position, and now you don't want to be moved from that position away from the enemies so you can whack them with your melee weapons. The higher level feat on a surface looks pretty simple. It's called Master of Many Styles, and you have to be level 16 to even take this feat. And it only requires you to have opening stance, another feat requirement. This feat gives you a free action every time your turn starts. And this reaction basically lets you use an ability that has the stance trait. This lets you swap stances out on the fly and at no cost to your actions. So don't think that just because you have 1 or 2 weapons that you have to dedicate every single feat to those weapons. You can have a more well-rounded style using different weapon styles, maybe a range style when the ranged enemies are far away, and switching to a big 2-hander when the enemies get close, or really changing up the style of your combat by having multiple stances for your weapons and not having to worry about constantly spending feats to switch in and out of these stances. Now, fighters really don't have a path at 1st level. We talked about this before. It really goes down to what kind of weapon groups you as a fighter want to focus on and what kind of gameplay are you looking for with your fighter. There are certain abilities that as you get higher and higher level in fighter, you get to pick a weapon group that you get better at faster than your innate proficiencies, but eventually all the weapons you get are a legendary proficiency or master with the advanced weapons. But there's even a feat that lets you make your advanced weapons go on the same progression as your martial weapons. So you can be legendary in your advanced weapons. So, like I said, fighters really have a feat choice at 1st level that they don't have a path choice. It's really, like I said, it's really what weapons you want to focus on, what weapons you want to take. That maybe you want to take weapons that increase your defense by taking a parry weapon in your offhand, or even a shield, sticking with one-handed weapon, or maybe you can try a shield weapon and a 2-handed weapon trait. So maybe like a Dwarven War Axe or a Bastard Sword that has a 2-weapon trait. So you can use it in one hand. When your shield explodes or it gets broken, you can then pick that 2-hander up and start going to town. Switching from a very defensive style to a very offensive style. Or maybe you want to try a more dual-wielding or a single-handed weapon, keeping your other hand free for a whole lot of feats that require that. Some of them even you fight with one hand and then you can grab people. So now we're going to talk about the drawbacks of the fighter. Every class has drawbacks. No one class has the answer to everything. So fighters really only get one more skill training than the other classes we've looked at. Cleric and the Druid. We already have videos on those. And with little benefit to intelligence for all the abilities you get as a fighter, there's virtually no benefit to intelligence besides either more skills or you're picking skills that have intelligence as a requirement. The other drawback is, unlike the cleric or the druid that can, with the right spell, even bards, even the right spell, supplement their weaknesses with some magic, fighters fight. That's it. Fighters, all their abilities are derived into fighting. So the choices that you can make outside of combat might be more limited which puts way more emphasis on your skill feats for Pathfinder Core. Your background can help widen out this choice by helping with a skill feat to offset this, as I mentioned before, but unless you specifically want to play an intelligence-based fighter, you're going to get very little benefit from pumping any significant amount of intelligence. So you have to choose your skills and your skill feats very carefully, possibly focusing on ones that boost your combat's effectiveness as well as your sociability if you want to interact with that aspect of the game. Because while we all like to cut down those monsters, there is a whole other aspect of the game that you don't want to accidentally lock yourself out of because, like, oh, well, I only have a 10 intelligence or a 10 charisma, and I really don't want to be talking when someone else with the high charisma wants to talk. Let's recap. Fighters are one of the most accurate characters or combatants in the game, and they tend to keep ahead of this curve compared to almost all other characters in the game, and with the most amount of weapons. They don't just get a small selection, they get all the weapons. With a solid amount of health only being beaten out by the Barbarian, ability to wear all different types of armor, as well as several different combat techniques to choose from, makes fighters welcome in nearly every party, either to absorb damage, dish out their fair share as well. Just make sure you pick your skills wisely, and make sure you pick those skill feats wisely as well. So you can just be as useful swinging your sword as when you sheath it. But that's just one person's opinion. Sound off down in the comments below if you like to play with a walking arsenal in your game. But until then, may your die rolls be crits and may you always roll max damage. See you later.